She did not raise her hand. She simply stood up, and the entire room went silent. The room smelled like old coffee and dry air. 30 chairs had been set up in uneven rows inside a plain briefing room at Coronado Naval Base in San Diego, California. It was a cold November evening in 2003. Outside, the Pacific Ocean was dark and restless. Inside, the lights buzzed overhead, and a large map glowed on the projector screen. The men seated in those chairs were not ordinary soldiers. They were Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, Marine Force recon operators, and a few Air Force officers. These were people who had already seen real combat. They had already been to Afghanistan. They had already been to Iraq. Most of them carried that experience quietly, like a weight they had learned to live with. At the front of the room stood Captain Marcus Hale. He was a SEAL with 19 years of service and 2 Silver Stars, which are among the highest military honors a soldier can receive. He was not a man who wasted words. He spoke in short sentences and expected people to keep up. On the projector behind him was a map of a narrow mountain valley in Kunar Province, a region near the Afghan-Pakistani border that soldiers quietly called a very dangerous place. The valley was deep and surrounded by ridgelines that rose more than 8,000 feet on either side. The enemy knew every path, every rock, every shadow in that valley. Getting in was hard. Getting out was harder. Captain Hale explained the mission plainly. A high-value target was believed to be operating inside that valley. A team of SEALs would go in, do their job, and come out within 11 minutes. 11 minutes. That was the entire window. The problem was air support. The valley was so narrow and the surrounding mountains so steep that conventional aircraft could not safely provide cover during the mission. One wrong turn at high speed and a pilot could fly directly into a ridgeline. One bad angle and the whole operation falls apart. Hale needed someone who had actually flown low-altitude combat support in mountain terrain before, not someone who had practiced it in a simulator. Someone who had done it for real, in the sky, under pressure. He set his pointer down and looked across the room. "Any combat pilots in here?" he asked. His voice was calm. It was not a dramatic question. He simply needed to know. The room stayed quiet for a moment. No one moved. These were operators, not pilots. Most of them had never sat in a cockpit. A few glanced around to see if someone else would answer. No one did. Then, from the very back row, a chair scraped against the floor. A figure stood up. Slowly, without hurry, without drama, she simply rose to her feet and waited. Her name was Captain Jenna Lane Hartwell. She was 31 years old. She stood 5 feet and 6 inches tall. She had short brown hair and calm eyes and the kind of face that did not call attention to itself. She was the only woman in the room. She was there because of a joint study between the Air Force and Special Operations Forces, a routine program meant to improve how the two groups worked together. Her job that week was to observe, take notes, and write a report. Nobody had expected her to speak. Nobody had expected her to matter. Captain Hale looked at her carefully. "You are a pilot?" he asked. It was not meant to be an insult. It was simply surprise, honest, unfiltered surprise. A senior soldier in the front row actually turned around twice as if looking for someone standing behind her. There was no one. There was only Jenna standing still in the back of the room, waiting to be heard. "A-10 qualified," she said simply. 680 flight hours, 23 combat missions. 12 of those were danger close. Danger close means the aircraft is providing support within an extremely short distance of friendly soldiers. It is one of the most difficult and most important things a combat pilot can do. One small error and the people you are trying to protect are the ones who get hurt. Jenna had done it 12 times. She said all of this without raising her voice. She was not trying to impress anyone. She was just answering the question. Captain Hale did not smile. He was not easily impressed. Instead, he described the valley again, this time in sharper detail. The ridgelines at over 8,000 feet, the narrow airspace, the runs that would need to happen below 500 feet above the ground, the complicated exit routes that a pilot would need to plan in advance because there would be no time to think during the actual operation. He was laying out the problem the way a person lays out a puzzle, watching to see if the other person understands what they are looking at. Jenna listened to every word. Then she spoke. She explained that the type of aircraft she flew, the A-10 Thunderbolt, was specifically built for exactly this kind of mission. It was slow by fighter jet standards, tough, and designed to fly low and provide support to soldiers on the ground in the most difficult conditions. She described the exact flight path she would use to enter the valley, turn, provide cover, and exit without losing control or hitting the terrain. She mentioned a natural gap between two ridgelines that would serve as an escape route. She explained the timing down to the second. She had never seen this valley before. She was solving the problem in real time, in front of 30 experienced soldiers, and she was doing it from memory and training and years of flying in places just like it. The room was completely quiet when she finished. Captain Hale stood still for a moment. Then he said 4 words that changed the rest of the evening. "Come up here, please." He stepped aside and gestured toward the projector. Jenna walked from the back of the room to the front, past 30 soldiers who were now watching her very differently than they had been 2 minutes before. She took a legal pad from the table, picked up a marker, and got to work. For the next 4 hours, she stood at the front of that room and rebuilt the entire air support plan for the Kunar Valley mission. She started from the beginning. She pointed out the problems in the original plan that she had spotted while sitting quietly in the back row. She was not harsh about it. She was precise. She showed where the plan left gaps, where a single aircraft was not enough, and where the timing between the ground team and the aircraft was too loose to be safe. She drew diagrams on the legal pad. She wrote out timing sequences. She talked through every possible situation that could go wrong and explained what the pilot should do in each one. One of her key ideas was to use 2 aircraft instead of 1. The first aircraft would watch over the ridgeline while the second came in to provide support. Then they would switch. This way there was never a gap, never a moment when the soldiers on the ground were left without air cover. She also redesigned the communication process between the pilot and the ground team, cutting out 3 steps that she explained were too slow and could cost lives in a fast-moving situation. And she planned a backup exit path through a dry creek bed visible on the terrain map that pilots could use if their main route was blocked. By 9 o'clock that night, Captain Hale's original plan had been completely replaced. The men in the room, who had spent years learning to trust very few people and nothing they had not tested themselves, were writing things down, not because they were told to, because they wanted to. One soldier later said that listening to Jenna Hartwell explain air support in that room was like watching someone solve in minutes what the rest of them had been struggling with for days. She had a way of making complicated things clear. She never talked down to anyone. She just explained what she knew, and she knew a great deal. 3 weeks passed. The mission date arrived. In the early hours of a cold morning, a team of 14 SEALs landed in Kunar province and moved into the valley under the cover of darkness. Jenna was in the sky above them, flying in a 2-aircraft section exactly as she had planned. She orbited in a wide circle above the mountains, listening to the radio, watching the ground below through her instruments. Everything was dark. Everything was still. For a short while, it seemed like the plan might go smoothly. Then the mission broke apart. A second enemy force appeared from the north. They had not been seen in any intelligence reports. Nobody had expected them. The target was not at the location the team had planned for, and the 11-minute window was already running down. 14 soldiers were pinned down in a narrow valley, taking fire from 2 directions at once. One of them had been hit in the shoulder. The team leader called for immediate air support on the radio. His voice was controlled but urgent. Jenna heard the call. She was already moving. She turned the aircraft south, dropped her altitude, and came in below 400 feet above the ground, exactly as she had described in that briefing room 3 weeks earlier. The valley walls rose on either side of her. The ridgelines were close. She kept her eyes steady, her hands steady, and her mind completely focused on the task. She came through the valley, provided the support the team needed, and then broke left through the natural gap in the ridgeline, the one she had identified on the map weeks before, and climbed safely out of the terrain. The northern threat was stopped. The second aircraft came in and handled the eastern side. The SEAL team reached the extraction point. All 14 men got out. The soldier with the shoulder injury was treated and recovered fully. The mission, which had seemed to be falling apart at the worst possible moment, held together. It held together because 3 weeks earlier, one woman had stood up in the back of a room and refused to stay quiet. After the mission, the reports were reviewed by commanders at the highest levels. Captain Hale submitted a detailed account of how the air support plan had been redesigned, who had designed it, and how that redesign had directly contributed to the safe outcome of the mission. The revised communication process that Jenna had written by hand on a legal pad was later adopted as a standard procedure. The two-aircraft coordination method she had recommended became part of official planning guidance for mountain terrain operations. Her ideas, born in a 4-hour working session in a simple briefing room, became part of how the military operates. Captain Jenna Hartwell received the Air Medal with Valor for her actions that night. The award recognized both her courage in the air and the quality of her decision-making under extreme pressure. She accepted the medal quietly, the same way she had stood up in that room, without performance, without a speech. She simply received it, nodded, and went back to work. She flew for 11 more years after that mission. By the time she retired as a lieutenant colonel in 2014, she had more than 1,200 flight hours in her logbook and 4 combat tours behind her. She had flown in some of the most difficult airspace in the world, over mountains and deserts and places most people will never see. Through all of it, she remained the same person she had been in that briefing room in San Diego. Steady, prepared, willing to speak when it mattered. After retiring, she went home to Medford, Oregon, the small city where she had grown up watching her father fly a small aircraft over green fields in the early morning. She opened a small flight school. She taught young men and women how to fly. Some of them were nervous students who gripped the controls too tightly and looked at the horizon with wide eyes. She was patient with all of them. She never rushed anyone. She knew that confidence in the sky does not come from being fearless. It comes from being prepared. It comes from knowing your aircraft, knowing your environment, and knowing yourself. There is one thing she tells every student who gets nervous about flying close to the ground or through tight spaces. She does not tell them to be brave. She does not give them a motivational speech. She says very simply, the terrain is not your enemy. The terrain is your plan. She means that what looks like a wall or a trap or a dead end is, to a prepared pilot, a path. The mountain that seems to block you is also the thing that can protect you, guide you, and lead you out if you know how to read it. She learned this lesson, not in a classroom, but in the sky, in the dark, above a valley where 14 people needed her to know exactly what she was doing. She does not tell her students about Kunar right away. She waits until she feels they are ready, ready not just to understand the story, but to understand what it means. Because the most important part of the story has nothing to do with flying. It has nothing to do with aircraft types or timing or communication plans. The most important part happened before any of that, in a room full of people who did not expect her to speak, when she made a quiet decision that most people would never have made. She could have stayed in her chair. Nobody would have blamed her. She was not asked to lead. She was not asked to redesign anything. She was there to observe and take notes. The room was full of experienced, decorated soldiers. She was the youngest person in the room. She was the only woman in the room. Every signal in that environment was telling her to stay seated, stay quiet, and let someone else handle it. But she looked at the problem on that projector screen and she knew the answer. And knowing the answer and staying quiet, when real lives were going to depend on that answer, was something she was not able to do. That is the part of the story that stays with people. Not the medal, not the mission. The moment in the back row when a chair scraped the floor and a woman stood up, and the room went silent, and everything that came after became possible. It is a small moment and a large one at the same time. It is the kind of moment that does not make front pages, but it is the kind of moment that changes things quietly and permanently in ways that travel far beyond the room where it happened. The 14 soldiers who came home from Kunar that morning, the new procedures written into military doctrine, the students learning to fly in Medford, Oregon, all of it traces back to that one quiet, steady, unstoppable decision to stand up.